County Administrator Chuck.
Thank you, Harry. I'd like to welcome everyone here today to this discussion about how we can deliver what we call social outcomes better than we do today in an improved and maybe new and innovative process. On behalf of all the community leaders that are here today and have been willing to find innovative solutions to some of our most difficult problems, I'd like to welcome you to the discussion. And I'd also like to express my gratitude to the Federal Reserve for championing this concept and for hosting this particular conference. Social innovation financing is really what we're going to talk about today. It's been around for a few years, gaining a great deal of popularity throughout the country. A lot of communities are now basically grabbing hold of it and investing in it. When I first heard about the concept, I thought that it had potential for Pima County and that we need to basically shift the concepts today about how we deliver social programs and services within the community to basically save the taxpayers some money as we sometimes can basically prove that the outcomes are better and have more measurable effects or impacts. Let me tell you a little bit about how we deliver services today and how the traditional models work. And those are something that basically I describe as boxes and silos. And we've always heard about them, but let me explain to you how they work in the real world in government. Generally, we basically, and I think everybody's heard the phrase, think outside the box. Well, it's in government always very difficult to do. I recently saw a TV commercial where they had a manager discussing a problem with his team, and his team was divided into really two groups. You had one kind of dynamic individual standing outside this cardboard box. They had a group of people. The other part of the team were standing inside the cardboard box. And the dynamic individual seemed to have all the right answers and basically seemed to kind of carry the discussion and got all the folks who were standing in the box, their heads were turning over, looking and kind of nodding. And then at that point in time in the commercial, one of the team members, one of the shorter ones in the front, decided to kind of lift his leg and stand out of the box, try to climb over the edge of the box. Well, what happened is he got about 3/4 of the way of climbing out of the box and found that he couldn't put his foot on the ground. And so he then sheepishly kind of pulled his foot back, his leg back over the box and stayed in the box. That's kind of exactly what is our problem. You know, we're afraid to innovate for fear of failure. And what happens, taxpayers, as I kind of have a few experiences over the years with this, they generally accept what we call mediocrity in governmental services. They come to think it's commonplace. But if you're kind of thinking outside the box and taking a risk, taxpayers usually severely punish failure. And so it's any wonder why we don't basically cause people to think outside the box. We get trained to think inside the box because it's safe. We're not going to get punished if, in fact, we try and do something different and it fails. Another one that I see all the time, and very often we see it probably more in county government than you see it in any other form of government, and it's this thing called, and you see it in, say, universities, or you see it in other places called silos. And silos are basically things that get constructed to prevent the interaction of people in solving problems. And I'm glad the county attorney and Barbara, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your views on this as well. We see silos most commonly in the criminal justice system, and they're there for a reason. They're there because that's the way we've structured our systems. We've structured it such that trying to exchange information beyond the silos is very difficult. And in some cases, particularly in the legal profession, if we exchange information beyond the silos, it's deemed to be unethical. And so we get punished for those kind of things. And so what we have is in the criminal justice system, we take a criminal defendant into the prosecutorial silo, into the defendant silo, into the judicial silo, and basically, if the person's found innocent, we say forget it. If they're not, they're put in the prison silo for typically about, on average, about 10 years. Cost of taxpayers about $50,000 per year. So what we have is these traditional models of boxes and silos, and they've worked, as I would say, they haven't really worked at all over the years. We basically, attack the symptoms of the problem. We don't cure the causes of the problem, and for that reason, what happens is that we haven't made any significant progress in any of the major societal kind of problems we have today, whether it's poverty or homelessness or anything dealing with, say, reentry from folks who have been confined and put into the criminal justice system. Those boxes and silos have kind of failed us pretty badly. We do have an added dimension, and when I talk traditional boxes and silos, I'm talking probably 50 years of how local governments, state governments, federal governments have addressed these issues. Many of you come from a component of that called the NGO, kind of life, and the NGO life is really the non-governmental organization, something that basically I think governments in looking at solving social problems basically said, well, let's create and have NGOs to help us get past these particular problems. Well, what did we do as governments? What we found that what we did as governments is we basically required the NGOs to comply with our boxes and silos. And that what we became more concerned about was basically how they spent the money that, in particular case of local government, gave them. How efficiently did they spend it? Did they cross all the T's and dot all the I's? Did they, in fact, do all the things that we want them to do? We didn't care much at all about the program outputs. We basically said, you're a social service agency, you deal in the area of, for example, hunger. Well, we assume you're going to accomplish your task. What we're really more interested in doing is making sure that the $50,000 or the $100,000 that we give you is well and properly spent contractually. So we concentrated not at all on the outcomes. And so what we've done is we've hamstrung even our NGOs at thinking outside the box or taking different approaches. What we like to try to do is drill down and get information that basically deals with how well are we accomplishing what we set out to do. In other words, are we in fact measuring outputs? Are we talking about how we're doing things and doing it constructively? How we're in fact making real change, and that's always the difficulty that we have. What we have here and what we're going to talk about today is a whole new opportunity, and we call it paying for success. And when you talk about paying for success, what are we talking about? We're really talking about some tools that deal with improving the processes and improving the performance and reducing costs to taxpayers and actually having better outcomes. All of those things combined basically make it something that's worthwhile and something that's new and a little different and innovative than what we do today. What we would like to see is that if a program is successful, and what's a little different about this particular program is that part of the resources that it takes to make it work comes from the private donations or the private sector. And so it's kind of the investment. And when we talk about bonds, we're really talking about those private investors that basically are going to make some investments for social change that may see some return on their investment. So the worst that's going to happen is that we have a program, we define it, it's invested in, it's done differently, It may save the taxpayer some money. The outcomes may be better, and some private investor may make a return on their investment. And nothing particularly wrong with that. In fact, it's something that probably we ought to foster. We really want all the same things. We need to basically meet the needs in the nonprofits of our clients. We need to meet the needs of our citizens, and ultimately, if it leads to the taxpayers saving some money, that's really a perfect outcome. We've never really, in the Pima County, shied away from doing things differently. We've done a lot of things differently in the past, and we're probably going to try doing this differently to see if, in fact, we can actually effectuate real change. As Larry talked in the discussion, we've divested ourselves of a lot of our healthcare delivery direct services. The outcomes, I think, are better. We've had some experiences in this whole area of change and not change, and some of them have been very good, and some of them have not been so good. And I'm going to come and give you 3 examples that talk about what we've done good in the past and kind of what we've probably done wrong. But in some cases, what we're doing is, if you can always talking today about. If you can always have more successes than failures, you're doing fine. It's just your ability to survive those initial failures is what makes the difference between long-term success and basically not having any success at all. Back in 1997, we went through and had a bond issue, and this is, again, I don't want to confuse social impact bonds with bond issues, but it's a story that's somewhat similar to how do you approach a problem, can you think outside the box, and can you save money. We had a bond issue because we had a housing crisis in a juvenile detention facility. We had 150 juveniles detained in a facility basically designed for 70, and the projections were based on current increases in detention that facility would soon basically surpass the need to have over 300 beds for detention. Big crisis. We went to the voters and said we have to do something to increase the capacity of the juvenile detention system. And the voters said, sure, spend $45 million and let's build a juvenile detention facility that basically can house up to 350 juvenile detainees. And that wasn't too awfully long ago. That was in 1997, 98, 99, open for business. It is now, that facility is obsolete. It is in fact holding probably today 30 juveniles in detention. And the reason it's obsolete is because somewhere along the line, at least in the judicial system and the folks who run the juvenile detention facility, dared to actually think outside the box and to embrace a program of alternatives to detention. And those alternatives to detention made that capital investment obsolete. Now, we made it. It's still there. We don't know if it ever be used for anything, but it can be. Perhaps if the Wildcats win the national championship and we have a riot on 4th Avenue, we'll have a place to detain the folks who are celebrating. But it's just an example of how we sometimes make decisions that are along what we call very traditional trajectories. But if someone dares think outside the box, we can change the outcomes dramatically. The second one I want to talk about is something called the University of Arizona Medical Center South Campus, and that used to be called what we call Keno Community Hospital. And this is an example of, and when you hear about this concept, paying for success, this is an example of paying for success when we didn't even know we were paying for success. What we did is we operated a hospital at Keno Community Hospital that had been obsolete since 1980, but it took it 24 years to die. And so we last operated that hospital in 2004. Our last year that we operated that hospital, we lost $33 million. It had one medical specialty, Hospitals are supposed to be full service, all medical specialties. It's only medical specialty with psychiatry. We had on average 3 to 5 beds filled in a 180-bed hospital. In medical surgical, we had about 50 filled in psychiatry. We said something's got to change. We cannot afford to do this any longer, and so we decided to pay another institution for success. What we did is we paid the University of Arizona to basically come in and take over that hospital and make it a real hospital. And that's what it is basically today. It's called the University of Arizona Medical Center South Campus. Today, instead of losing $33 million a year, we're paying the university $15 million. And what we said is we will pay you for success. We will measure the products and processes and the beds you fill and the services you provide, and we'll only pay you if, in fact, you can meet some minimum standards. And so today, instead of having an obsolete hospital, we have one that basically has the surgical operation activities growing by 400% in 2 years. We have the basic census up 112%. We have clinic visits up to 160,000 a year compared to what they were 30,000 back when we had the facility. And instead of having 3 or 5 medical surgical beds filled on average every day, they now have 50. And so the example and the concept of paying for success is very, very real and can in fact be achieved. You just have to think differently. No one would have ever thought differently about basically having a county hospital run by a university. Well, we decided it was the only way it could survive, and they took it over, and it's worked well. The last example is one I think you're going to hear more about, and it's one that's very, very beneficial. The issue of, I'll give you one more before we get to that one. Prisoner detention and the mental health crisis. It is no secret that the largest single mental health treatment facility in this county occurs at our jail. We have, on average, and that jail costs $56 million a year to operate. We have, on average, 2,000 people a day in that jail. And of those, over 53%, or just over 1,000 people, are basically maintained because we provide medical services in a correctional or a detention setting. Over half of those people are in behavioral health caseload. So what that means is that over half of those particular people in that adult detention facility have some type of mental illness, or maybe that's why they're in the jail. And over 200 of the 1,000, or 1/5, have a serious mental illness. We have, and if you then look at the statistics further, of those 1,000 people who are in the jail who have a behavioral health issue where they're receiving treatment, half of those will leave the jail. Well, they're all going to leave the jail. Half of them will return within 1 year. We've had one individual return 29 times. We've had another return 22 times. And it's basically because the delivery of effective mental health services to that population is not effective. It's not working. It obviously needs something done to actually correct it. And so this is an opportunity, when you think of the enormous amount of money that's spent, an alternative. Thinking outside the box, looking at pay for success has an opportunity to basically do something in the social service area related to behavior and mental health that can save significant public dollars, particularly as it relates to our jail. The last one I'll talk about is one that I think, yes, our county attorney will speak to you much more detail. But it's the issue of drug treatment alternative to prison. And this is a program that is very, very effective, as you'll learn. And I'll give you just a couple of statistics. It's basically been tried on, and this is basically people who are getting treatment as opposed to being sent to prison and being treated in order not to reoffend. And we've had, I think, you'll get more data, 70% success rate of, say, 52 individuals already in the program. It costs about $50,000 a year to send a person to prison. And what happens is that when you think of the savings with regard to not sending these individuals to prison, you see that the program's probably saved the taxpayers over $1 million a year, and basically probably also changed the life outcomes of the folks who have been involved in the program and have successfully completed it. But it is one of those programs that's threatened by what I started this discussion about, the silos. And the silos here are intergovernmental. They relate to the state of Arizona and Pima County and our various roles. And in Arizona, the state, through the Department of Corrections, operates the prison system. The county obviously operates the local criminal justice system from a prosecution, defense, and detention perspective. The county is the one paying for now these programs to save the state money. As you can see, that is not a long-term model for success or sustainability. There has to be a recognition that the two silos, local and state, have to be broken down to understand that by helping one, you help the other. And so just another example of the problems we face in silos. We know that there's a huge opportunity today for you to learn more about Pay for Success. There's a growing awareness that community development and economic development are actually linked. Communities that are good communities basically succeed economically and attract others to do so. We need to build on that success and bring new investment and new ideas to Pima County. So we're going to talk about Pay for Success 101. And what that is we learn more about the nuts and bolts of these models today. You will. There are probably a lot of questions that you're going to have because it's not an easy concept to grasp, particularly those who are in either local or state government or a nonprofit that actually receives fundings for social programs. But it's something that we need to basically talk about implementing and moving it forward. We know that we've been lucky enough to have the Federal Reserve here today because they believe that Pima County is ready to, talk about doing things differently, talk about an alternative delivery model for some social service programs that have not only program purposes but real measurable outcomes, and that we're ready to, I think, make this transition. And I think they're absolutely right because we are. What we need to do is kind of match their opportunity with a little bit of our action. And I intend to do that in a couple of ways. And one of the ways is that we will, and I will ask the Board of Supervisors to allocate and commit $50,000 to a process, an RFP process that talks about all the alternatives that exist locally and what can actually work in a Pay for Success initiative within this community and within this county. And then we're going to look and ask for others to make matching investments and to try and gather as much as $150,000 for that purpose. And we've already had a little bit of good news about a match already committed. So we're very appreciative of that. But we need to really talk about and prioritize the specific areas of interest in the county service areas where these new strategies can lead to cost savings, because cost savings are really important. And we need to initiate this community planning process so that the community decides what are our greatest goals and what are our opportunities to achieve success and where we should concentrate our efforts. We don't have all the answers, and we expect the community to take and help us with that. We also think that we can talk about the changes that are necessary organizationally, even within the county structure. And many of you who know us and know the county, you think we're a big immobile blob that doesn't really respond much to change or outside forces or influences. $1.4 billion budget does that to you. But what we really are going to do, and what many of you don't know, we have a program, and as I was saying earlier, the vernacular is different from community to community. But we have an outside agency review committee that talks about how the county spends up to $10 million directing towards various NGOs, nonprofits, in the delivery of social programs. Well, what we really want to do is probably change the outside agency review program to one of pay for success, a pay for success program that concentrates not on programs, but on outcomes. Because that's really what we really want to focus on. We've concentrated for far too long on just programs. We've funded program after program after program. We've monitored people in the nonprofit sector year after year by contract. Did you spend all your money? Do you have all the right FTEs in the right boxes? And did nothing to say, well, what were your real outcomes? And that's what we really need to do. We need to kind of flip the concept, flip the paradigm. I know it's going to be difficult. I know it probably will be controversial. But anything that we do from time to time that affects real change is controversial. So I think I'm willing to accept the heat, and that's just fine, because if you're going to change, you basically have to make change happen, and you're not going to make everybody happy. But in the long term, the whole purpose here is to have the outcomes that make this community better off than when we started. And so this process is one that I think I want to start us on the steps to move it forward, such that we can say 5 years from now, we have had and we've moved the needle on poverty, we've moved the needle on homelessness, we've moved the needle on hunger, we moved the needle on, say, our criminal justice rate of reincarceration. So we need to basically talk about, do something that will allow us to do things differently, innovatively, cooperate and use the investments of the private sector. Because this is what we have not done before. We use our own money and we use our tax money, but we've never really tapped the full potential of the private sector. And this pay for success and social bonds allows us to finally do that. Because I think, from my experience with all the private sector folks that are involved in, so we'll call it, some type of process to improve the community, they want to do it collaboratively. And so we need to basically make sure they get the message that we're going to do it collaboratively, and it's not another government program where we, measure boxes checked. We're talking about real outcomes, things that interest the private sector. So thank you very much, and I think you're going to enjoy the rest of the afternoon. And we do very much appreciate your time, because we know it is in fact important, but we also think sometimes change is important. Thank you.